Hi, it's Katrina. Are you ready to challenge your understanding of history? Join me on a journey to explore the mysterious, the forbidden, and the unknown. We have an ostrich egg that can completely change our understanding of Egypt, an island rife with horrors and lost secrets of the Maya. Today's video is filled with history they don't teach kids in school. The Nubian Egg. What does an ancient egg, the pyramids of Egypt, and the legendary lost city of Atlantis have in common? Let me tell you. There is an egg that is 6,500 years old and might just prove that the Egyptians discovered America before Christopher Columbus. Way before. The artifact is known as the Nubian Egg. It is a real ostrich egg discovered in 1907 by British archaeologist Mallaby Cecil Firth. He was excavating a tomb in Nubia, located in northern Sudan, when he found the incredible egg. Mallaby was investigating more than 100 tombs from the lost Naqada or Badarian civilization, which existed prior to any of the great Nubian kingdoms you might be familiar with, like the Kingdom of Kush, for example. These significant prehistoric civilizations flourished in ancient Egypt around 4400 to 3100 BC. The egg found in the tomb was dated to be 6,500 years old. Why should you care about an egg found in a Nubian grave? For a few reasons. The first being that the egg has survived 6,500 years. An ostrich laid this egg before Stonehenge was even built, and it's still around right now. Although you wouldn't want to eat it, I doubt it would be very tasty, not to mention it was snuggled up in someone's grave. The other important thing about the egg is that it is covered in remarkable carvings. On one side of the egg are 3 pointy triangles that look shockingly similar to the Great Pyramids of Giza. Then there is a snake-like carving of what must be the Nile River beside them. It seems to be a map, with the pyramids representing Egypt. This is a big problem because, according to mainstream archaeologists, the pyramids are only 4,600 years old. How could someone have drawn the pyramids on this egg 2,000 years before they were built? There are, of course, several possibilities, each one more intriguing than the last. The first theory is that the triangles are mountains. But what mountains? Sudan isn't exactly famous for its snowy mountain peaks. This seems unlikely. Another theory is that the pyramids are far older than anyone realizes. They could predate the Egyptians themselves, despite all the evidence pointing to them being built by Egyptian pharaohs. There's one more detail on the egg that might shed some light as to what it means. The concentric circles carved around the top of the egg could point to something even more shocking. I know, it's hard to believe anything could be more dramatic than the pyramids being 2,000 years older than they should be. Some theorists have connected the circles on the egg to something Plato said in 360 BC. This is a quote from Plato's book Critias. Making alternate zones of sea and land larger and smaller encircling one another, there were 2 of land and 3 of water, each having its circumference equidistant every way from the center. That might sound like a bunch of gobbledygook, so let me explain. The quote is Plato's description of the lost city of Atlantis. He was describing a city made of concentric rings of land and water. Amazingly, what Plato described is drawn on the ancient ostrich egg. It's drawn a little crudely, but it is there. Someone seems to have drawn a rough image of Atlantis on the top of the egg. The theory is that whoever created this egg was aware of both the pyramids and the city of Atlantis. The distance between Egypt and Atlantis on the egg proves that they were not the same civilization. Atlantis was somewhere north of the pyramids and north of the Nile, presumably somewhere near Spain, which is right where Plato claimed Atlantis was located. The horrors of Mona Island. The history of this Caribbean island is awash in blood, secrets, and forbidden darkness. Mona Island is not a place many people have heard of. It's located about halfway between Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, and it is a honeycomb of underground passageways. The island has what's known as a dark zone, a place deep below the surface where pools of fresh water sit still in utter blackness. It's a dungeon where light from the upper world doesn't shine. It's down in the dark zone that many of the island's inscriptions can be found. like an ancient petroglyph from the 16th century that reads, "God made many things." In the chambers closer to the surface, there are artifacts from too many civilizations. Archaeologists once found an Incan vase filled with gold. They even found a Spanish jar filled with the oldest wine ever in the Americas. Mona Island itself belongs to Puerto Rico, and by extension, the United States of America. Yet it hardly receives a fragment of the number of tourists as Puerto Rico. It is remote, mostly inaccessible, and formidable. Archaeologist Ovidio Davila once described Mona Island as a floating fortress. The island has certain seabirds, frogs, and iguanas that you can't find anywhere else on the planet. It has ancient mysteries and amazing biological diversity. Here comes the forbidden history. Long before Europeans arrived in North America, Mona Island was settled by a group of indigenous people who likely came from South America. People were living on the island as early as 3000 BC. When Christopher Columbus arrived on Mona Island in 1494, it was already home to an ancient culture. Since Columbus's arrival, the island has seen unspeakable horrors. It's been taken over by conquistadors, priests, pirates, the military, people mining for bat guano, and most recently, scientists and refugees. Let's get back to its ancient past. Stone tools have been discovered in rock shelters on the island from 5,000 years ago. Then, around the 12th century, a group known as the Taínos settled the island. The Taíno were the historic indigenous peoples of the Caribbean. Their descendants are still living throughout the Caribbean islands right now. The darkest era in Mona Island's history was in the early part of the 16th century. By 1515, the island had become a key rest stop for the crews of slave ships. As if that wasn't horrible enough, King Ferdinand II gave the native Taíno two options if they wanted to continue living on the island. The island they had already been living on for around 400 years. The Taíno could either work as fishermen or go to work in the guano mines. Guano was important for the production of gunpowder and fertilizer. It was basically gold. Most natives chose to work as fishermen or farmers, but the Spanish still needed laborers in the mines. So they brought captured Native American slaves from other islands to do the back-breaking labor. By the time Puerto Rico was handed over to the United States by Spain in 1898, the population of Mona Island had been reduced to 6. Only 6 people were left. The violent history continued into the 20th century. During Prohibition, booze smugglers used the island's ancient caves for storing liquor, drugs, and perfume. Then in 1942, a German submarine fired shells from its deck at the island because they thought a reforestation base was a secret military facility. What are your thoughts on Mona Island's terrifying past? The genius of the Vikings. Did you think the Vikings were simple folk, just pillaging and raiding? Think again. While the modern age is often hailed for its rapid technological advancements, a groundbreaking discovery has revealed that the Vikings may have possessed technology far ahead of their time. The Vikings were explorers first and foremost. They traveled the river systems and coastlines, establishing trade networks, building markets, and founding cities. As the Vikings spread their roots, a new feudal system was established. The Vikings built their own civilization. Officially, Dutch glasses makers invented the first telescope in the late part of the 16th century. But in the year 2000, archaeologists discovered a sophisticated lens at a Viking site on the island of Gotland. The artifact changed history. It's known as the Visby lens, and it's around 600 years older than the first Dutch telescope. Here's a picture of it. And it may not look very exciting, but researchers say this small greenish piece of glass was wildly advanced for its time. Not just advanced, the piece of glass proves that the Vikings had access to sophisticated lens-making techniques. They knew how to make lenses when other civilizations were just starting to understand the simple laws of refraction. According to lead researcher on the project, Dr. Olaf Schmidt from Aalborg University, history is not as it seems. Dr. Schmidt said that the elliptical lens design was invented much earlier than anyone thought, and that the knowledge was subsequently lost. In other words, the Vikings could make telescopes. But then something happened that caused the knowledge to disappear for 6 centuries. The mystery goes a little deeper, and there are still a lot of questions unanswered. 10 lenses were discovered on the island of Gotland. Although they clearly belong to the Vikings, they may not have been crafted by the Vikings. Dr. Schmidt said there are clues that the lenses could have been manufactured in Byzantium, the ancient empire that grew from the rubble of the Eastern Roman Empire. If that's true, then history is definitely not as it seems. It means the Vikings were trading with Byzantium. It also means that the Byzantines may have inherited their telescopic technology from the early Roman Empire. The Visby lens, a simple greenish piece of glass, could have a history going back much further, perhaps to a time when humans had access to all kinds of sophisticated technology. And now for a quick break, because it's shoutout time! I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Roger Baker and Paul Kramer for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. 5,000-year-old temple. 3 human skeletons were recently found in a Peruvian temple wedged between its walls, and it's pretty bizarre. They think the skeletons were involved in a ceremony 5,000 years ago. This is what forbidden history is all about. The excavation began early in the summer of 2024, so pretty recently. Researchers were investigating the walls of a multi-story temple partially buried beneath a sand dune in the Zana district of northwestern Peru. Just take a look at what they've excavated in this picture, courtesy of the Peruvian Ministry of Culture. Isn't that amazing? You can see pieces of the temple being revealed from underneath what is essentially a mountain of sand. According to Luis Armando Muro Yonan, the director of the archaeological project, the temple was a major religious complex. Its walls were decorated with strange designs of beings from another world, or maybe from some drug-fueled dream. The creatures on the walls have human bodies, bird heads, feline features, and reptilian claws. They are human, bird, cat, lizard hybrids, and frightening to say the least. Researchers don't know if these beings were part of the ancient mythos of those who built the temple. Nobody knows if they were gods or aliens or extinct animals. It's a huge mystery. As for the skeletons jammed between the walls, they are also a huge mystery. The people may have been sacrificially killed as part of a ritual and then added to the foundations of the structure. It would be like finding the bones of sacrificed monks inside of a monastery's wall. I can't tell you much about the culture that built the temple or anything about what they worshipped. Their secrets might be lost forever. What I can say is that during the excavation, scientists unearthed a much more recent monument from only 600 AD. That was when Peru was dominated by the Moche culture. The Moche were known for building massive temples and completing incredible works of art. They were particularly fond of crafting ceramic goblets in the shape of human heads. And as you can likely guess, they were all about human sacrifice. The fact that the Moche were still using this temple thousands of years after it was built is amazing. That is excellent continuity. But were the Moche still using the temple in the way it was originally intended? Did they know there were skeletons in the walls? I wonder what happened here that ended the temple's use, and how the temple ended up beneath the sand dune. Thoughts? The Magic Sphere of Athens, Part 1. In 1866, a magic sphere was discovered at the foot of the Acropolis of Athens. The humongous stone orb, looking kind of like an ancient cannonball, is carved with the image of what looks like the Statue of Liberty. But the stone sphere is about 1,800 years old. At first, it seems like another historical enigma, an artifact out of place and out of time. However, the sphere doesn't really depict the Statue of Liberty. It shows the Greek god Helios, Lord of the Sun. Hold on a second. Does that mean that the Statue of Liberty was modeled after an ancient god? Yes. Yes, it does. Many Americans don't realize that Lady Liberty was modeled after a pagan deity. Only it wasn't Helios. It was a Roman goddess named Libertas. Libertas and Helios shared many features. Although different gods from different cultures, they have a similar history. The idea represented by Helios, Libertas, the Statue of Liberty, and the Magic Sphere of Athens goes back to the beginning of time. It was Professor Athanasios Rousopoulos who found the sphere more than 150 years ago near the ruins of the Theater of Dionysus. located at the bottom of the Acropolis. On the sphere is the image of Helios, crowned with rays of the sun. His sun rays look just like Lady Liberty's crown. In one hand, he holds a whip. In the other is a scepter with 3 torches on its end. When you look closer, you see a lot more symbolism on the sphere. At Helios' feet are 2 beasts, either dogs, lions, or dragons. It's difficult to tell. There's also a snake with a human head, which likely represents one of the constellations in the sky. Then there are a bunch of weird symbols. There's a big circle containing a row of 5 overlapping circles. There are some nonsensical inscriptions, plus groups of Greek letters arranged in such a way that they don't form any intelligible words. Created sometime around the 2nd century AD, scientists have never been able to decipher the full meaning of the sphere. They don't know what any of the inscriptions mean, and they don't know what the symbols represent. However, experts do believe they know the overarching theme of the orb. It was involved in some way with solar worship. It was also viewed as a magical object. Belgian scientist Armand Delat examined the sphere in 1913. He believed it represented the god Helios and was critical in his veneration. Others think it was a talisman given to gladiators to ensure victory in combat. Some still believe the figure on the sphere isn't Helios at all, but actually Hecate. Or perhaps it was Dionysus himself, Greek god of drunkenness and ritual madness. Crazy part is that all of these gods and goddesses were depicted with the same spiky crown that is worn by the Statue of Liberty. It's not a coincidence, people. Just wait until you hear about the goddess the Statue of Liberty may have really been based on, which I'll tell you about in a bit. The forgotten ruins of Oxaca. The Maya could be much older than we thought, and they are already old. What many don't realize is that the history of the Maya began upwards of 8,000 years ago. This isn't even a secret in the scientific community. There is a period of pre-Maya civilization known as the First People period, which started in 6000 BC. It appears the classic Maya, the ones who built great cities in the Mexican jungle, inherited their knowledge from these earlier people. The issue is determining when one culture ends and another begins. When did the first people morph into the Maya? When did the Romans morph into the Italians? When did the Romans in Britain simply become British? If the Maya inherited their knowledge, language, science, and traditions from these other people, aren't they just a continuation of that earlier culture under a different name? It's a complex question, and one that takes both a philosopher and an archaeologist to answer. But what I want to know is how far back in time the pre-Maya culture goes. What is the earliest possible beginning of the Maya? The Maya's deepest root reaches as far back as the Pleistocene epoch. Yes, it is just as old as it sounds. The proof can be found at the forgotten city of Oxaca, located around 60 miles south from the capital city of Merida on the Yucatan Peninsula. The city was initially explored by the travel writer John Stephen in 1839. Since then, it's mostly been overlooked by scientists. There has been some research, but not much, which is disappointing because of the incredible weirdness of the site. I'll start with the ruins themselves. They have been heavily damaged by something, but no one knows what. There was definitely a disaster that hammered the city's structures with incredible force. It's possible that the damage was caused by tsunamis, maybe by tsunamis caused by the biblical flood that supposedly occurred in 9500 BC. Oxaca and other cities in the Yucatan appear to have been bludgeoned by substantial volumes of water over sustained periods. Most Maya ruins are dated to within the last 2,000 years or so, but maybe the science behind dating these ruins is wrong. There are other oddities in the city besides just water damage. In a small courtyard near the city center, early explorers discovered a temple decorated with carved columns. The columns were carved with very unusual humanoid figures. They were mostly destroyed, even in the 19th century. Luckily, a few surviving photographs show just how weird the figures were. They don't look particularly Mayan. Some of them sort of look like robots, with square heads and huge bulbous eyes. The eyes are so bulged that it almost looks as if the figure was wearing eye goggles. A few of the statues were safeguarded and taken to the Anthropological Museum in Mexico City. You can still see them on display today. Although they are wearing traditional Mesoamerican outfits, they don't quite look right. One of the figures is wearing a necklace with an upside-down hand motif on it. The necklace doesn't seem weird. It's only weird when you realize the upside-down hand motif is related to the mythical city of Atlantis and the legendary prophet Edgar Cayce. I'll save Edgar's long and weird story for another time. The main thing you need to know is that Edgar Cayce made all kinds of prophecies, many of which have allegedly come true. One of his prophecies involved Atlantis. He said that Atlantis was split between two political parties before its destruction. One of them was named the Children of the Law of One. That faction symbol was the upside-down hand motif. It may be a stretch, but to some it is proof that whoever carved the strange statues in the forgotten city of Oxaca may have been survivors of Atlantis. What do you think about this theory? Let me know in the comments. The Relic of the Holy Diaper. There are several places in Europe where you can find the diaper of Jesus Christ. Of all the bizarre Christian relics out there, Jesus' diaper has to be one of the weirdest, especially since there are so many of them around. Also known as the swaddling clothes of Jesus, one of them can be found in the reliquary treasury of the Dubrovnik Cathedral in Croatia. The relic is on display for everyone to see, held inside of a special silver case, which is ornamented with winged figures. Another can be found in the city of Aachen, Germany. It's been on display on and off since the 13th century. The cloth is safe inside the golden shrine of Saint Mary within the Aachen Cathedral. Once every 7 years, the relic is exhibited in a grand ceremony, and then it is tucked away once more. While some people call it a diaper, they didn't really have diapers 2,000 years ago. What they had were cloths or swaddling clothes. A little historical tidbit is that during antiquity, people believed that newborn infants had to be swaddled in cloth. If they weren't, they would develop deformed limbs. Up until around the 14th century, almost all depictions of the nativity scene showed the infant Jesus tightly swaddled in a cocoon. The symbolism behind Christ's swaddling is very Christian. Christ didn't need to be swaddled, yet he did at the same time. God divested himself of his omnipotence by taking on the human form in the body of Jesus Christ. He had to experience humility and compassion, and that included baby swaddling clothes. The mystery is that nobody knows where the clothes in the churches in Dubrovnik and Aachen really came from. The Golden Shrine of Saint Mary dates to about 1230, more than 1,000 years after the death of Christ. The cloth is of course hard to date, but it is considered sacred nonetheless. A French cow catastrophe. A medieval village vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a labyrinth of hidden tunnels and a haunting silence. This unusual site with a scary past was recently excavated in District, France. The archaeological excavation didn't look like much if you were standing at the surface. The site might be 800 years old, but at first glance it is nothing but a bunch of grayish-brown soil. That's because the real site is underground. When archaeologists started excavating the area, they uncovered the ruins of an agricultural community that thrived during the Middle Ages. It was a farming town where people took care of cattle, grew food, and all the typical stuff you did in a medieval farming town. But there was something else going on here other than just farming. The excavation revealed the ruins of a home, with an entrance at its center leading down to a network of subterranean tunnels. The tunnel network extended about 160 feet and branched into 5 different rooms. These tunnels took a significant amount of work to carve. Somebody chiseled huge corridors out of the rock, most of them tall enough to stand in. Although archaeologists say the hidden tunnels could have been used to store food, doesn't that feel a little extreme? The archaeologists already said that they found 30 silos used for storage. How much storage did this small town from the 12th century need? Archaeologists admitted they aren't sure what the tunnels were used for. The network could have served as a defensive hiding place for the townsfolk. Maybe they needed the tunnels to hide from rampaging bands of mercenaries. Or maybe there was something even weirder at play. Down in the tunnels, archaeologists found a water well going down an additional 40 feet. The townsfolk were bringing up their water from way below ground. How did they even figure out how to do this kind of thing? Then there is the mystery of what happened to the village. Around the year 1200, the whole place was abandoned. Archaeologists think a sickness struck the town's cattle population, killing all of the cows for miles around. Without cattle to use for meat and dairy, everyone left. At least that's the going theory right now. But maybe the abrupt disappearance of the townsfolk had something to do with this incredible underground labyrinth. If you have any theories of what happened here 800 years ago, let me know in the comments. Pirate terror in the Mediterranean. A ghost ship has been unearthed, revealing a world of piracy and terror long forgotten. The haunting wreckage of a pirate ship has been found at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, just off the coast of Spain and not far from Morocco. The ship dates to the 17th century. It also has maritime archaeologists at a loss for words. It was heavily armed and likely on its way to Spain to capture, kill, and enslave. It wasn't an assault ship, though. Just listen to how sneaky these pirates were. Their ship was disguised as a humble merchant vessel. Archaeologists found its cargo loaded with pots and pans from Algiers. The clever pirates loaded up on cheap goods so that nobody would question their motives as they sailed to Spain. Luckily for whoever their target was, the pirates didn't make it. They must have gotten stuck in a storm and sank. The wreckage was discovered by a company out of Florida called Odyssey Marine Exploration. They were on a quest to find the HMS Sussex, an English warship that sank in 1694. During their expedition, they also found a Roman shipwreck, a Phoenician shipwreck, and this destroyed pirate ship. The ship belonged to a group known as Barbary pirates. They were the pirates you don't really see in blockbuster films. They were primarily Muslim and terrorized the Mediterranean throughout the 15th century. They operated out of the pirate stronghold of Algiers under the dominion of the Ottoman Empire. Their reign of terror lasted for about 200 years. The Islamic pirates had a strong penchant for slavery. They were notorious for preying on coastal villages all along the Mediterranean and Atlantic coasts of Africa. The pirates would kidnap and ransom people back to their families, or sell them into the growing North African slave trade. Founder of Odyssey Marine Exploration, Greg Stem, said Barbary pirates were a daily threat. From 1525 until 1830, Algiers was a city of roughly 60,000 pirates, renegades, and cutthroats. Just think about those numbers for a second. The Islamic pirates of Algiers took to the seas much earlier than the pirates of the Caribbean. Their operation was also way bigger. Greg Stem said they lived by the sword. Their sunken ship was only about 45 feet long, relatively small for its time. It would have been equipped with 2 masts and triangular lateen sails. It was small enough that the pirates could have rowed the ship if they needed to. Though, of course, nobody could bring it back to the surface from its watery grave at 2,700 feet deep. The Magic Sphere of Athens, Part 2. The Statue of Liberty, with her spiky crown of sun rays, may have been based on Hecate from Greek myth. If true, and if Americans ever find out, there could be an uproar. Hecate was the goddess of magic, witchcraft, and necromancy. If you were going to reanimate the dead, summon a ghost, or curse your enemy with a spell, you needed to invoke the name of Hecate. She was one of the most frightening of the Greek goddesses. Well, she may have been the most frightening goddess ever, period. She was so terrifying that even Zeus was afraid of her. Hecate lived in the underground caves of Hades and was served by a species of flesh-eating vampiric monsters known as the Empusa. Just like the Statue of Liberty and the Greek god Helios, Hecate was depicted with a torch in one hand. Helios held his scepter of 3 torches, and Hecate held 2. Do you know who doesn't hold any torches in their hand? Libertas. The Statue of Liberty is said to be based on the Roman goddess Libertas, but Libertas was never depicted as holding a torch. Libertas was portrayed with a spear in one hand and a liberty cap in the other. The liberty cap was synonymous with freed slaves in antiquity. It started out as a traditional soft cap worn by the Thracians, Dacians, Scythians, Persians, Trojans, etc. It later evolved to signify freedom and the pursuit of liberty. First in Rome, later in the American Revolution, and most recently in the French Revolution. Libertas was worshipped as early as the Roman Republic in the 3rd century BC. She had a temple built in her honor on the Aventine Hill, one of the 7 hills upon which Rome was built. That makes her one of the original Roman deities. The Greeks even had their own equivalent of Libertas named Eleutheria. She was the personification of liberty. Libertas also didn't have a crown of sun rays, unlike the Statue of Liberty, Helios, and Hecate. When you look at the magic sphere from Athens, it's hard not to connect the figure depicted with the Statue of Liberty. The shocking truth is that when you look at Libertas as depicted in Rome, she just isn't that similar to the Statue of Liberty. It makes you wonder who America's most famous statue was truly based on. Was it Libertas? Or is the Statue of Liberty a colossus of Hecate, goddess of necromancy, mixed with a bit of Helios, the original sun god? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching!
Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
The Index Librorum Prohibitorum. The Catholic Church's history of censorship dates at least as far back as the 9th century. Still, one of its more extreme attempts to control its followers came with the publishing of the Index Librorum Prohibitorum in 1560. Established by Pope Paul IV, it was essentially a list of thousands of books and publications that Catholic worshippers were banned from reading. Perhaps the most dramatic form of censorship in Christendom, the Index was not limited to theology. It banned works ranging from love stories to philosophical treatises to political theory. The Index prohibited both religious and secular works, as well as versions of the Bible that the Church had not approved. Many were written by intellectuals and were about topics like astronomy and philosophy. The invention of the printing press had made reading material far more accessible than ever before, and Catholic authorities saw this type of thought-provoking and scholarly material as a threat to its followers' faith. Pope Paul IV created the Index partially as a response to this increased availability of literature, which officials believed might encourage people to question or stop believing what the Church told them. 20 subsequent editions were issued over the next several hundred years, with the final version being published in 1948. It was only enforceable within the Papal States and in places where civil governments adopted it, which happened in several Italian states. The Catholic Church formally abolished the Index Librorum Prohibitorum in 1966. Instead of replacing it, officials left it up to each individual to discern what types of material are dangerous to their spiritual well-being. In announcing these changes, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith reminded followers that they have a responsibility to use sound moral judgment in making these decisions and avoiding anything that might poison their faith. Poveglia. In northern Italy's Venetian lagoon, less than a half-mile from Venice, the tiny island of Poveglia first appeared on the historical record during the 5th century. It remained inhabited until 1379, when its residents fled because of warfare. Starting in 1776, Poveglia was used as a quarantine station for plague victims and sufferers of other diseases before being converted into a mental hospital in 1922. The island has been vacant since the asylum closed in 1968, despite recent efforts to repurpose it into a luxury vacation resort. As much as half of Poveglia's soil contains human remains left behind by the over 160,000 patients who died there. Archaeologists have uncovered mass graves containing the remains of hundreds of plague victims on nearby islands, but have yet to fully explore Poveglia. Legend holds that a doctor who worked at the island's mental hospital tortured and killed patients before butchering them. While these claims remain unsubstantiated, the hospital's remains are still there, being slowly reclaimed by nature. Meanwhile, many paranormal enthusiasts believe Poveglia is haunted. But the island remains off-limits to visitors, and there is no word on if or when it will open up to the public. The destruction of China's past. China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, began making power plays at the young age of 13, when he became the head of his state and had his mother's lover executed because he was a perceived threat to the young man's power. He ruled as the Qin dynasty's first emperor from 221 to 210 BC, during which time he got rid of any material that scholars might use to challenge his supremacy. Acting on the advice of his chief advisor Li Si, Qin Shi Huang is said to have ordered the destruction of nearly all previously existing books within the empire. The only exceptions were literary works on astrology, agriculture, medicine, divination, and the history of the Qin state. Anyone who was caught with certain ancient works, such as the Book of Songs or the Classic of History, faced brutal punishment. The year after the ban went into effect, Qin Shi Huang reportedly buried 460 scholars alive after they were caught with the forbidden books. Another account claims that the emperor had killed alchemists after they had fooled him into thinking they held the secret to eternal life. Either way, it's clear that Qin Shi Huang sought to destroy any historical records that failed to fall neatly in place with his narrative, and his mission succeeded, leaving modern historians with gaps in their quest to understand the past. Ovid's banned books. The Roman poet Ovid lived from 43 BC to 17 or 18 AD during the reign of Augustus. He was extremely popular yet controversial during his time, often focusing on erotic themes that Augustus found inappropriate and felt that the public needed protection from. Without consulting the Roman Senate, the emperor banished Ovid to the island of Tomis on the Black Sea. Augustus took particular offense to Ars Amatoria, or The Art of Love, a 3-book series that was meant as a guide to help men find and keep women, and to advise women on how to win and keep a man's love. Ovid's well-intending advice may have been interpreted by Augustus as a threat to the monogamous marital standards he encouraged among the population. His goal was to increase the Roman birth rate, but this was just the first of several times that Ovid's works would be banned from society. In 1497, during the burning of the Vanities, followers of the Dominican priest Girolamo Savonarola collected and burned tens of thousands of supposedly immoral objects in Florence, Italy. Included among them were all of Ovid's works, which were also burned in England in the bishop's ban of 1599. The poet's writing was even banned from being imported into the United States in 1928, when customs officials prohibited an English translation of Ars Amatoria from entering the country. The ban was lifted 2 years later owing to a legal exception that allowed books of literary or scientific merit that were otherwise considered immoral to be allowed into the United States. Thepicatrix. Originally written in Arabic during the 10th or 11th century, Thepicatrix is the Latin name for a 400-page book about magic and astrology. Nobody knows who wrote it. Historian Ibn Khaldun attributed the book's authorship to an astronomer and mathematician named Maslama al-Majriti, but experts had since proven that this is unlikely based on passages in the Thepicatrix that are believed to date back to when al-Majriti was a young child. The book's origins have been traced to Moorish Spain, which encompassed the Muslim-ruled portion of the Iberian Peninsula when it was written. In 1256, King Alfonso X of Castile ordered the book to be translated into Latin, leading to its circulation throughout Europe from 1450 to 1600. As a result, the Thepicatrix had a profound influence on medieval and Renaissance magic, as well as philosophy and other scholarly disciplines. It was a controversial work, leading some who studied and praised it to avoid mentioning any parts of the book that seemed to run contrary to Christianity. But, as historian Avner Ben Zaken pointed out, the Thepicatrix resonated with several Renaissance thinkers who were unfriendly to the establishment, and at some point, both the Arabic and Latin versions of it fell into obscurity until their rediscovery in the early 20th century. The Thepicatrix was essential for turning natural magic into philosophy, converting a sorcerer into an experimentalist, and altering the practice of natural magic into an official education system. It encouraged the application that scholars shift their focus from tradition and dogma to the distant sources of natural magic. Taliban totalitarianism. Afghanistan was uniquely located along ancient trade routes, historically serving as a connection between the East and the West. Traders from many parts of the world passed through, turning it into a culturally diverse center of commerce. And in recent decades, a lot of this history was preserved. That all changed when the Taliban rose to power, causing archaeological excavations to grind to a halt, and ultimately leading to the destruction of tens of thousands of ancient sites and artifacts. When the Taliban reconquered Afghanistan, archaeologists and museum curators scrambled to secure the historical sites and artifacts that they still had access to. They were worried that the extremely conservative Islamic fundamentalist group would go around destroying valuable history, much as they had in 2001. During this earlier round of destruction, Taliban founder Mullah Omar ordered his militants to destroy a pair of monumental sculptures known as the Buddhas of Bamiyan. Standing at 180 feet and 125 feet tall, these statues were carved into a cliffside 8,200 feet above sea level during the 6th and 7th centuries. Under Omar's strict religious views, they were considered idols, and these are just two of many landmarks and artifacts that received the same label and have been lost to history at the Taliban's hands. The group also destroyed nearly 2,800 statues and other works of art at the Kabul Museum and some 55,000 literary works at the Pui Khmuri Public Library, which housed some of the nation's most historically valuable texts. Some suspected that Omar ordered the destruction as retaliation against Western countries for imposing economic sanctions on Afghanistan, and that the acts had less to do with his beliefs than he claimed. Either way, these ancient treasures from what was once a major cultural crossroads are gone forever. William Tyndale's New Testament. Along with the printing press came increased literacy in societies where reading and writing were once reserved for the more privileged classes. Now that commoners had ready access to printed materials, they began learning these skills in large numbers. This proved troubling for some religious institutions, which felt threatened by the possibility of people reading and interpreting the Bible on their own. After all, up to that point, many, if not most worshippers, simply trusted that what the church told them was true and that it was commanded by Scripture. In England, it was illegal to translate the Bible into English or any other common language, and people were also forbidden from owning these illegal translations. Getting caught with one could come with the death penalty. William Tyndale was a forward-thinking biblical scholar who knew that the times were changing. He asked the Bishop of London to revoke the ban on English translations and to sponsor the publication of an English New Testament. The bishop refused, but Tyndale mass-produced the book in secret. Many copies were smuggled into England and other places where the translation was unwelcome, sending authorities after Tyndale. He was arrested in Antwerp in 1535 and was held prisoner at a castle in Belgium until late the following year, when he was strangled and burned at the stake for his decision to make the Bible available to everyone. Tyndale's New Testament remains one of history's most influential literary works, despite the extremes that were taken to try and squash it out of existence. It even coined several phrases that many people use regularly without realizing where they originated, including the powers that be, eat, drink, and be merry, and fight the good fight. Nazi book burning. As the Nazi Party rose to power, an association of German university students created blacklists of political and literary works that they deemed to be un-German. The lists included books by Albert Einstein, Ernest Hemingway, renowned poet and playwright Bertolt Brecht, novelist Erich Maria Remarque, and others who rank among history's most influential thinkers and creators. Many of them were Jewish. Starting on May 10, 1933, these student groups carried out a series of book burnings at universities throughout the country. In Berlin, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels delivered a speech to a crowd of 40,000, proclaiming that Jewish intellectualism is dead. Thousands of books were lit ablaze at these gatherings while students marched in unity against the so-called un-German spirit. After the initial book burnings, the Nazis continued on their campaign to eliminate books by Jewish writers and others whom they viewed as a challenge to Hitler's extremist rhetoric from the public consciousness. The Germans burned millions of books in its occupied territories, including Poland, where 80% of the country's school libraries and 3/4 of its scientific libraries were destroyed. The Great Library of Alexandria. The burning of the Great Library at Alexandria in northern Egypt is one of history's best-known travesties. Founded in 283 BC, it was at one point the ancient world's largest library, housing over 100 full-time scholars and containing texts by renowned thinkers and writers like Homer, Plato, and Socrates. Even more impressively, it didn't admit visitors based on wealth, unlike other libraries of the time, but was open to anyone who proved to be a worthy scholar. Legend holds that the Great Library of Alexandria burned to the ground at some point, taking hundreds of thousands of valuable literary works with it. But evidence suggests that its decline was much more gradual than experts previously believed, and budget shortfalls played a major role in the library's downfall. The first alleged fire at the Alexandria Library occurred around 40 AD, when Julius Caesar and his invading forces set it on fire, marking the first in a series of destructive battles and blazes over the following centuries. Government spending cuts and other policy changes helped immensely with tipping the Great Library at Alexandria into non-existence. When Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius revoked resident scholars' pay and banned foreign scholars from visiting, he effectively closed the library down, leaving its precious contents neglected and forgotten. Religious riots further damaged the learning center in 391 and 415 AD, and the library met its ultimate end in the year 640, when it was captured by Arab forces, who reportedly gathered the remaining manuscripts and used them as fuel for thousands of bathhouses. Thanks for watching! Remember to subscribe for more videos like these, and I'll see you next time. Bye!